Along Ocean Parkway on the south shore of Long Island, a narrow strip of road cuts between marshland and the Atlantic Ocean. In December 2010, that isolated stretch near Gilgo Beach became the center of one of the most consequential homicide investigations in New York State history. What began as a search for missing 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert led police into dense brush just off the roadway. There, investigators made a discovery that would change the direction of the case entirely. Within days, 4 sets of human remains were located in proximity along Ocean Parkway. The victims were later identified as Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Each woman had disappeared between 2007 and 2010. All 4 were found wrapped in burlap. The similarities in method and the tight geographic clustering immediately suggested a pattern. The area became known nationally as the site of the Gilgo Four, and the broader investigation became associated with what the media described as the Long Island serial killer case. For years, the investigation moved without a named suspect. Leads were pursued, agencies collaborated, the FBI assisted, but no arrest was announced. Evidence collected in 2010, including burlap bindings, hair strands, digital records, and phone data, remained preserved while the case continued in the background. In 2022, a newly structured multi-agency task force re-examined the case. Prosecutors later outlined that investigators revisited historical cell site data connected to burner phones used to contact several of the victims shortly before their disappearances. Analysis showed those devices moving between Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park during critical time periods. Detectives also returned to a 2010 witness statement in the Amber Costello investigation. A witness had described her last known client as driving a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. Vehicle registration records revealed that Rex Heuermann owned that model during the relevant time frame. Surveillance began in 2022. Investigators monitored Heuermann's movements discreetly and collected discarded items for DNA comparison. In January 2023, law enforcement retrieved a pizza box he discarded in Manhattan. DNA recovered from the crust was analyzed and compared to hair evidence preserved from the burlap used to bind one of the victims. According to court filings from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, advanced genetic analysis connected the DNA from the pizza crust to hair recovered at the crime scene. The forensic process involved whole genome sequencing and SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism testing, techniques capable of analyzing far more genetic markers than traditional short tandem repeat testing. Because some hair evidence lacked a root, this expanded sequencing approach became central to the case. The defense challenged the scientific validity of this method. In 2025, a Fry hearing was held in New York to determine whether whole genome sequencing and SNP testing met the legal standard of general scientific acceptance. The court ruled the methodology admissible, marking the first time such technology would be used in a New York State criminal trial. Additional hair evidence recovered from victims was also analyzed. Prosecutors stated that certain hairs were consistent with genetic profiles of Heuermann's wife and daughter. Authorities publicly clarified that both family members were out of state during the time frames of the killings and are not accused of involvement. Prosecutors further indicated that they believed the hairs were transferred indirectly from Heuermann himself, rather than suggesting the family members were present at crime scenes. On July 13, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested in Midtown Manhattan. On July 14th, he was arraigned in Suffolk County Court and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. He pleaded not guilty. In January 2024, he was formally charged in the murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes and again entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution expanded further in 2024. In June, Heuermann was charged in the deaths of Jessica Taylor, whose remains were discovered in 2003 and later linked to Gilgo Beach, and Sandra Costilla, who was killed in 1993 in North Sea, New York. In December 2024, he was additionally charged in the murder of Valerie Mack, whose remains had been found in 2000 and later identified through forensic testing. He pleaded not guilty to all additional charges, bringing the total number of alleged victims in the indictment to 7, spanning from 1993 through 2010. In September 2025, a Suffolk County judge ruled that all 7 murder charges would be tried together in a single consolidated trial, denying a defense request to sever the cases. The court later set a tentative start date for the trial shortly after Labor Day 2026. Prosecutors have also emphasized a Microsoft Word document recovered from a device attributed to Hoyerman. According to court filings, the document allegedly contained checklists referencing supplies and problems, including concerns about DNA and tire marks. The prosecution describes the document as evidence of structured planning. The defense disputes its interpretation and relevance. In January 2026, defense attorneys filed a 175-page motion seeking to suppress certain evidence, including statements allegedly made by Hoyerman upon arrest and the methods used to seize and analyze the discarded pizza crust. Suppression hearings remain ongoing as pretrial litigation continues. As of early 2026, Rex Hoyerman has pleaded not guilty to all charges and awaits trial. The final determination will be made in court, where evidence gathered over more than a decade will be examined in full. If you enjoy real crime videos like this, kindly take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us grow and bring you more content worth watching. Attention shifts to the second case. A handwritten envelope addressed to Beverly Hills Police, the city misspelled, the block letters uneven but deliberate. Inside, a short note directing officers to a house on Elm Drive. On December 23, 2000, that address led police to the body of Susan Berman, shot once in the back of the head inside her Beverly Hills home. Years later, another letter surfaced. This one dated 1999. Written by Robert Durst to Susan Berman. It used the same unusual spelling. Beverly. The spelling would become a focal point in a murder prosecution that took more than 2 decades to reach a verdict. Long before a microphone captured anything, investigators had paper. Robert Durst was not an unknown figure. He was the heir to a powerful New York real estate family. In 1982, his wife Kathleen "Kathy" Durst disappeared from South Salem, New York. She was 29 years old. He told police he had put her on a train to Manhattan. She was never seen again. In 2017, she was declared legally dead. On November 1, 2021, the Westchester County District Attorney announced a grand jury indictment charging Durst with her murder. That case never proceeded to trial. Between those 2 dates, another killing took place. Susan Berman had been one of Durst's closest friends. In the early 1980s, when reporters began asking questions about Kathy's disappearance, Berman spoke publicly in his defense. By 2000, New York investigators were once again reviewing the cold case. Then Berman was killed. The anonymous Beverly Hills letter arrived just before police discovered her body. It was not signed. It was not traced immediately. It sat in the file until filmmakers reopened it. In 2015, HBO aired the documentary series The Jinx, directed by Andrew Jarecki. Durst agreed to participate. He gave interviews on camera. He discussed the disappearance of his wife. He discussed Morris Black. During production, the filmmakers obtained a copy of the 2,000 anonymous letters sent to Beverly Hills Police. They also located the 1999 letter Durst had written to Berman. The matching misspelling, Beverly, stood out. When confronted with the comparison during filming, Durst appeared visibly unsettled. The camera kept rolling. The microphone stayed on. After a tense interview session, Durst went into a bathroom. He was still wearing a live microphone. Alone, speaking to himself, he made several fragmented remarks. Among them were, "There it is. You're caught. You're right, of course. What a disaster. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." When the final episode aired on March 15, 2015, the documentary presented part of that sequence in a tightened edit. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. That televised presentation suggested a direct flow from question to confession. In reality, the remarks were separated by other rambling statements and occurred in a different order. The audio was not a single uninterrupted declaration. It was a series of disjointed comments, because television editing is not courtroom evidence. On March 14, 2015, 1 day before the final episode aired, Robert Durst was arrested in New Orleans on a warrant related to Susan Berman's murder. He was extradited to California. His trial began in March 2020, but was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It resumed in May 2021. In court, prosecutors did not rely on the documentary edit. The full unedited bathroom recording was reviewed during legal proceedings. The judge evaluated the original audio before allowing portions to be admitted. Jurors did not hear a dramatized television cut. They heard the evidence in context. Prosecutors argued that Durst killed Susan Berman to prevent her from speaking to investigators about Kathy Durst's disappearance. They presented the anonymous Beverly Hills note, the 1999 letter written by Durst, handwriting expert testimony, witness testimony, travel and financial records, the bathroom recording. The defense argued the audio was ambiguous and shaped by editing. They challenged witness credibility. They questioned interpretation. On September 17, 2021, the jury found Robert Durst guilty of first-degree murder. They also found true the special circumstance allegation that he killed a witness to prevent testimony. On October 14, 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time, a jury returned a murder conviction against him. Robert Durst died on January 10, 2022, while his appeal was pending. Under the legal doctrine of abatement ab initio, when a defendant dies before their appeal is resolved, the conviction is vacated. The law treats the conviction as though it never became final. As a result, although a jury convicted him and a sentence was imposed, the conviction was technically vacated because appellate review had not concluded. The trial occurred, the verdict was rendered, the sentence was imposed, but legally the conviction was not final at the time of his death. The third case, July 31, 1977. Just after 3 a.m., gunshots shattered the quiet along Shore Road in Brooklyn. Inside a parked car sat 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz and her friend Robert Violante. A man approached and fired a .44 caliber revolver into the vehicle. Moskowitz was struck in the head and later died from her injuries. Violante survived but suffered permanent damage to his eyesight. It was the sixth fatal attack in a string of shootings that had gripped New York City for over a year. Ballistics confirmed what investigators already feared. The bullets matched the same .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver used in earlier attacks in the Bronx and Queens. Since July 1976, young couples sitting in parked cars had been ambushed at night. In April 1977, a letter left at a Bronx crime scene and addressed to police was signed Son of Sam, a name that quickly dominated headlines. The investigation led by the New York City Police Department had expanded into one of the largest manhunts in city history. Thousands of tips were reviewed, patrols intensified, sketches were circulated, yet no suspect had been arrested. But the final attack brought a shift. A resident, Cecilia Davis, later told police that shortly before the shooting, she had seen a suspicious man in the area. She also noticed a car parked near a fire hydrant. The observation did not sound extraordinary. Parking violations were common in New York. Officers issued citations every night. Nothing about a hydrant ticket suggested it would end a year of violence. Routine, however, produces records. Earlier that same night, an officer had written a parking citation to a yellow Ford Galaxy for being too close to a hydrant on Pine Street in Brooklyn, not far from where Moskowitz was shot. When detectives followed up on the witness's statement about the parked vehicle, they requested records of tickets issued in that immediate area during the time frame of the attack. The list was limited. One citation stood out. The vehicle was registered to David Berkowitz of Yonkers, New York. Detectives traced the registration to an apartment building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. Surveillance began. Parked outside the building was a yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy, matching earlier witness descriptions of a light-colored sedan seen leaving previous crime scenes. As the officers observed the vehicle before making contact with Berkowitz, reports indicate that through the window they could see items inside, including a rifle and an envelope bearing handwriting that appeared consistent with the distinctive script used in the Son of Sam letters sent to police and the press. The visual evidence strengthened their suspicion before the formal arrest even took place. On August 10, 1977, detectives approached Berkowitz outside the building. He was seated inside his car. According to arresting officers, he spoke calmly when confronted, saying, "Well, you got me. What took you so long?" Inside the vehicle, police recovered the .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver that ballistics later confirmed matched bullets from multiple crime scenes. The 13-month manhunt ended without a chase or struggle. The Yonkers apartment building soon became a point of intense public attention. Onlookers gathered outside, and the address was widely publicized. In response to the steady flow of visitors seeking photographs and souvenirs, the building's owners later petitioned to have the address changed from 35 Pine Street to 42 Pine Street in an effort to reduce unwanted attention. During questioning, Berkowitz initially claimed that a neighbor's dog had been possessed and had commanded him to kill. The statement fueled widespread speculation and media coverage. However, he later admitted that the story was a fabrication, crafted in part to bolster an insanity defense. Psychiatric evaluations determined that he was competent to stand trial. In May 1978, he pleaded guilty to 6 counts of second-degree murder. He received 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life imprisonment. The cumulative total amounted to 365 years to life, a figure that reflects the stacking of those 6 individual sentences in legal records. He remains incarcerated in New York State. If you want more videos like this, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating and bringing you more content to enjoy. Thank you. 4th case, Los Angeles and Orange County, 1985. Lights stayed on through the night. Windows were sealed. Guns rested beside beds. News reports warned of another break-in, another killing. A thin, dark-haired man haunted Southern California, and no one knew his name. The attacks intensified in the spring and summer of 1985. On March 17, 1985, in Rosemead, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was shot outside her home. The bullet struck the keys in her hand and deflected, allowing her to survive. Her roommate, Dale Okazaki, was killed moments later. 10 days after that, on March 27, 1985, Vincent Zazzara was shot in Whittier, and his wife, Maxine Zazzara, was murdered inside their home. The crimes continued across Los Angeles County and into Orange County. Victims ranged in age from their 20s to their 80s. Some were shot, others were stabbed. Many homes showed signs of forced entry. Shoe prints from an Avia sneaker were recovered at several scenes. Detectives realized they were hunting a single offender, but they did not yet have his name. By the summer of 1985, the media had given him a title, the Night Stalker. Law enforcement agencies across jurisdictions worked to connect evidence, ballistics, shoe impressions, fingerprints, witness descriptions. Survivors described a man who sometimes forced them to swear allegiance to Satan. Yet despite mounting forensic work, the suspect remained unidentified. The crimes appeared random in geography and victim profile, which complicated the investigation. Fear spread faster than facts. Everything shifted on August 24, 1985. In Mission Viejo, Orange County, a stolen orange Toyota Corolla was discovered abandoned after another attack. Investigators processed the vehicle carefully. Ramirez had stolen and abandoned cars before, often wiping them down to remove evidence. This time, however, a partial fingerprint was recovered from the rearview mirror. It was small, incomplete, but it was usable. The print was submitted to the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, recently implemented by the California Department of Justice. AFIS allowed latent fingerprints to be digitally compared against a statewide database far faster than traditional manual comparison. Within a short period, the system returned a match. Richard Ramirez, born February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. His prints were on file due to prior arrests in California for vehicle theft and drug-related offenses. For months, detectives had pursued a faceless offender. Now they had a confirmed identity. On August 30, 1985, authorities publicly released Richard Ramirez's name and booking photograph. Newspapers across Southern California printed his image. Television stations broadcast it repeatedly. The secrecy that had shielded him disappeared overnight. He was no longer an unknown predator moving in darkness. He was a man with a face the public could recognize. At the time of the announcement, Ramirez had traveled to Tucson, Arizona. Unaware that his identity had been revealed, he returned to Los Angeles on August 31, 1985. He stepped off a bus into a city that had seen his photograph. In East Los Angeles, residents recognized him near a convenience store. When he realized he had been identified, he attempted to flee. Members of the public pursued him through neighborhood streets. He was struck, subdued, and held until police arrived and formally arrested him. After months of uncertainty, the suspect was in custody. Ramirez was charged with 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries, along with additional related charges. His trial began in July 1988 in Los Angeles County Superior Court and lasted more than a year. Prosecutors presented testimony from survivors, forensic experts, and ballistics specialists. Evidence linked him to multiple crime scenes across counties. The fingerprint recovered from the stolen Toyota was critical in identifying him and unifying the investigation. On September 20th, 1989, the jury found Richard Ramirez guilty on all counts. On November 7th, 1989, he was sentenced to death. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison and remained on California's death row for more than 2 decades as appeals moved through the courts. On June 7, 2013, Ramirez died from complications related to B-cell lymphoma while still awaiting execution. Coming up next is the 5th case. The evidence was not dramatic. It was not a fingerprint left in blood or a witness stepping forward. It was a 3.5-inch floppy disk delivered to a Wichita television station on February 16, 2005. Inside that disk was a deleted Microsoft Word document. Hidden within the file was metadata, digital information automatically saved by the software. The author field listed a single name, Dennis. The organization field referenced Christ Lutheran Church. That tiny fragment of embedded data would end a manhunt that had lasted more than 3 decades. At the time the disk arrived, the sender was known only as BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill. For years, he had taunted police and media in Wichita, Kansas. His real name was Dennis Rader, but investigators did not yet have confirmation. What they had was digital residue. The disk had not appeared out of nowhere. In early 2005, BTK had asked police, through a newspaper, whether a floppy disk could be traced. Law enforcement responded publicly that it could not. That statement was strategic. Investigators understood the psychology of the man they were dealing with. He craved reassurance. He believed he understood the system. When the disk was mailed, forensic examiners quickly recovered deleted files from it. Even erased documents can leave recoverable traces. The metadata inside the Word document did not merely display the first name Dennis. It pointed to a specific organization, Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. That narrowed the search dramatically. Investigators checked church records and identified Dennis Rader as president of the church council. He lived in Wichita during the years of the BTK murders. He fit the age range. He had no obvious criminal record linking him to homicide, but the alignment was striking. The evidence was compelling, but it was not yet complete. Detectives moved carefully. They needed biological confirmation that the man connected to the church was the same individual who had left forensic evidence at crime scenes decades earlier. To do that, they obtained a court order for DNA material indirectly connected to Rader. His daughter had previously provided a pap smear sample that was stored at the Kansas State University Medical Center. Under a legally approved warrant, investigators accessed that sample for comparison. The resulting DNA profile was consistent with being the biological child of the unknown BTK suspect, whose semen had been preserved from the January 15, 1974, Otero crime scene. The link strengthened their case. On February 25, 2005, law enforcement arrested Dennis Rader during his lunch break near Park City, Kansas. After his arrest, authorities collected a direct DNA sample from him. Testing confirmed a match with the preserved evidence from the Otero murders. The digital clue had led to a genetic confirmation. Now we step backward further. In March 2004, BTK resurfaced publicly after years of silence. The year marked the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders. Packages began arriving at media outlets containing crime scene materials and letters. The tone was controlled and deliberate. He wanted recognition. For years, only 8 murders had officially been attributed to BTK. During the renewed communications and his eventual confession, Rader admitted responsibility for 2 additional killings, Maureen Hedge in 1985 and Dolores Davis in 1991, bringing the confirmed total to 10. Between 1974 and 1991, the killer had stalked victims in Wichita, binding and murdering them in their homes. He mailed letters describing his actions. He assigned himself the name BTK. After the 1991 murder of Dolores Davis, the communications stopped. The case cooled, though investigators preserved evidence carefully. Rader believed he had escaped permanently, By 2004, forensic science had evolved significantly. DNA testing methods had improved. Digital forensics could retrieve information invisible to the average user. When Rader reinitiated contact, he stepped back into an investigative landscape far more advanced than the one he had known in the 1970s. The floppy disk question was pivotal. He asked whether it could be traced. Police answered no. He relied on that answer. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty in Sedgwick County District Court to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He described each killing in detail under oath. On August 18, 2005, during the sentencing hearing, he delivered a lengthy, rambling statement lasting approximately 30 minutes. He spoke in detached terms, at times comparing himself to a predator. He wiped away tears during the proceedings. The court sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, totaling a minimum of 175 years before parole eligibility under Kansas law for crimes committed before the state reinstated the death penalty. Sixth case. Harold Shipman was a trusted family doctor in Hyde, Greater Manchester, the kind of GP who made home visits and certified deaths without raising alarm. Elderly patients relied on him. Families thanked him for his calm authority. For years, nothing about his practice appeared unusual to the outside world. Yet behind that professional image, prosecutors would later prove he was administering lethal doses of diamorphine to his patients. His crimes stretched across decades, and although suspicion surfaced more than once, it was a forged will, traced back to a typewriter in his own home, that finally exposed him. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946. He qualified as a doctor in 1970 at the University of Leeds and entered general practice shortly afterward. In 1976, while working in Todmorden, he was convicted of dishonestly obtaining pethidine and forging prescriptions. Court records confirm the conviction involved deception in securing controlled drugs for his own addiction. He was fined and underwent treatment. Importantly, he was allowed to continue practicing medicine. That early criminal conviction did not remove him from the profession. Instead, he rebuilt his career and later established a single-handed practice in Hyde. Over time, a disturbing pattern formed. Many of Shipman's patients were elderly women. Many died suddenly at home. Shipman was often the last person to see them alive. He frequently certified their deaths himself. At the time, oversight of single-doctor practices and death certification procedures was limited. According to the official public inquiry chaired by Dame Janet Smith, Shipman murdered at least 215 patients between 1975 and 1998, with a likely total closer to 250. His method, established through forensic evidence, involved administering fatal doses of diamorphine. In early 1998, concerns began to surface. A local GP and a funeral director noticed that Shipman's mortality rate appeared unusually high compared with other practitioners in the area. In March 1998, police opened an investigation. Medical records were reviewed, and statistical comparisons were considered. No charges were brought at that time, and the inquiry was closed. However, the later Shipman inquiry sharply criticized that initial police investigation. The inquiry concluded it had been flawed and inexperienced, stating that a more rigorous examination of medical records and patterns could likely have prevented the final 3 murders attributed to Shipman. That finding added a layer of institutional failure to the case, a missed opportunity that carried tragic consequences. Just 3 months after the initial investigation closed, on June 24, 1998, 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy was found dead in her home. She had been a former mayor of Hyde and was widely regarded as active and independent. Shipman certified her cause of death as old age. Her daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, questioned the explanation. Her mother had not been seriously ill. Then, another development intensified those suspicions. A will surfaced, supposedly written by Kathleen Grundy, leaving her estate, valued at approximately £386,000, entirely to Dr. Shipman. The document excluded her children. It was typed and brief. Angela Woodruff immediately believed it was fraudulent. The wording did not reflect her mother's voice or character. She contacted the police. Forensic document examiners began analyzing the will. Typewriters leave mechanical characteristics unique to each machine, subtle alignment variations, spacing inconsistencies, and distinctive impressions caused by wear. Investigators seized a Brother typewriter from Shipman's home and conducted comparison tests. The mechanical features on the will matched that specific machine. The spacing, alignment, and character impressions corresponded. The will had been typed on Shipman's own typewriter. The forensic link transformed suspicion into provable forgery. Police exhumed Kathleen Grundy's body. Toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of diamorphine inconsistent with natural death. The official cause of death changed from old age to homicide. Investigators began systematically reviewing other deaths certified by Shipman. Medical records were scrutinized. Computer forensic analysis revealed that entries had been altered after patients had died, with symptoms added retrospectively to justify clinical decisions. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998. As the investigation widened, more bodies were exhumed. Toxicology reports repeatedly confirmed diamorphine poisoning. Prosecutors ultimately charged Shipman with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery relating to the Grundy will. Authorities emphasized that while the indictment covered 15 victims, the true number was believed to be far higher. His trial began on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution presented toxicological evidence, computer forensic testimony showing post-death alterations to medical records, and expert document analysis linking the forged will to Shipman's typewriter. The will became central to establishing both motive and deception. It showed financial intent alongside lethal conduct. On January 31, 2000, the jury found Harold Shipman guilty on all counts. The following day, February 1, 2000, Mr. Justice Forbes sentenced him to life imprisonment and recommended he should never be released. In 2003, the Home Secretary imposed a whole life tariff. The government established the Shipman Inquiry in 2001. Over several years, it examined thousands of medical records, cremation forms, prescription logs, and death certificates. The inquiry concluded in 2005 that Shipman had murdered at least 215 patients and likely around 250. It also detailed systemic weaknesses that allowed him to operate undetected, including inadequate monitoring of controlled drugs such as diamorphine and insufficient safeguards in death certification procedures. Reforms followed. Oversight of controlled drugs was strengthened. Death certification procedures were revised to introduce greater independent scrutiny. Monitoring systems were improved to identify unusual prescribing patterns earlier. These changes became known informally as the Shipman reforms. On January 13, 2004, one day before his 58th birthday, Harold Shipman was found dead in his cell at HM Prison, Wakefield. The official ruling was suicide by hanging, the 7th case. On November 30, 1989, Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner from Clearwater, Florida, was last seen alive. Nearly 2 weeks later, on December 13, 1989, his body was discovered in a wooded area in Volusia County. He had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber firearm. His Cadillac was missing. At the time, there was no known suspect. Mallory's death appeared to be a single tragic homicide, but it was the beginning of a series that would span nearly a year and cross multiple Florida counties. Between June and November 1990, 6 additional men were killed. David Spears, discovered June 1, 1990, in Citrus County. Charles Carskadden, found June 6, 1990, in Pasco County. Peter Seams, who disappeared in July 1990, his body was never recovered. Troy Burris, found August 4, 1990, in Marion County. Charles Humphreys, discovered in September 1990. Walter Antonio, found in November 1990. All had been shot with a .22 caliber handgun. Several were shot multiple times. Their vehicles were stolen and later found abandoned miles away from the bodies. What initially appeared to be unrelated crimes began to show consistency. The victims were middle-aged men. Several had been last seen picking up a female hitchhiker or sex worker along Florida highways. Witnesses in different counties described a woman driving the victims' vehicles after their disappearances. That woman was later identified as Aileen Wuornos. Investigators eventually recovered a Ruger .22 caliber pistol connected to Wuornos. Ballistics testing compared bullets recovered from crime scenes with test rounds fired from the weapon. The microscopic markings matched in multiple cases. Ballistics evidence established that the same firearm was used in several of the murders. This was critical. It linked crimes that had occurred in different counties and transformed isolated investigations into a coordinated serial homicide case. Scientific comparison replaced speculation. The gun spoke through its markings. After the murders, personal belongings of the victims surfaced. Items such as cameras and other property were sold or pawned in Florida. State law required pawn shops to maintain transaction records. Sellers provided identification. Documentation included names, dates, and item descriptions. In some instances, fingerprints were recorded. Wuornos sold property belonging to victims. Pawn documentation placed her in possession of stolen items shortly after the men were killed. This evidence did not by itself prove homicide, but it strengthened the prosecution's theory of robbery as motive. It established that she benefited financially after the killings. Combined with vehicle theft and ballistic matches, the property trail became one part of a growing evidentiary structure. Records are quiet, but they endure. By late 1990, composite sketches of a female suspect were circulating. Law enforcement agencies coordinated across counties. Witnesses had identified a woman seen driving one of the stolen vehicles. On January 9, 1991, Wuornos was arrested at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Port Orange, Florida, on an outstanding warrant unrelated to the murders. Soon after, investigators located Tyria Moore, Wuornos's girlfriend, in Pennsylvania. Moore agreed to cooperate. Under police supervision, she placed monitored phone calls to Wuornos. And during those recorded conversations, Wuornos made incriminating statements. Shortly afterward, she confessed to multiple killings. Initially, she claimed self-defense, stating that the men had attempted to assault her while she was working as a sex worker. That claim would become central to her defense. However, her statements were not consistent over time. In later interviews, she admitted she killed the men cold as ice, suggesting robbery rather than self-defense. These conflicting accounts would follow her through trial and into public debate. Wuornos was first tried for the murder of Richard Mallory in Volusia County. On January 27, 1992, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. On January 31, 1992, she was formally sentenced to death. This was the first of 6 death sentences she would receive. In subsequent proceedings, she either pleaded guilty or was convicted in 5 additional murder cases. In total, she received 6 death sentences. 1 case remained unresolved in court. Peter Seams disappeared in July 1990. His vehicle was recovered, but his body was never found. Because no remains were located, Wuornos was never tried for his death. Wuornos's convictions were reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court, and through federal appeals, the death sentences were upheld. In 2001 and 2002, she dismissed her legal counsel and requested that her execution proceed. Courts evaluated her competency to waive further appeals and determined she was competent. On October 9, 2002, at Florida State Prison, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. She was 46 years old. The 8 case. Israel Keyes believed discipline made him invisible. For years, he traveled across the United States, committing crimes in different states, preparing in advance, burying supplies, selecting strangers, and avoiding obvious patterns that could tie him to a single location. He studied investigative methods and prided himself on control. But in February and March 2012, one decision, using his victim's debit card at ATMs across the country, created a digital trail that ultimately exposed him. On February 1, 2012, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was working alone at the Common Grounds coffee kiosk in Anchorage, Alaska. Late that night, Israel Keyes abducted her at gunpoint. Surveillance footage from the area captured a man leading her away from the stand. According to later FBI interviews and court records, Keyes forced Koenig into a white pickup truck he had been using in Anchorage. Her disappearance was reported quickly, and the case drew immediate attention. Keyes killed Samantha Koenig shortly after the abduction. Investigative records confirmed that he restrained her in a shed on his property in Anchorage and murdered her that same night. Days later, he left Alaska on a pre-booked cruise departing from New Orleans, a trip he had scheduled in advance. While he was away, the search for Koenig intensified. After returning to Alaska later in February, Keyes staged a ransom demand. The ransom note was left in an Anchorage dog park, and directions to locate it were sent via text message to Koenig's boyfriend. The demand was for $30,000. Investigators later confirmed that Koenig's father deposited $5,000 of reward money into her bank account in order to facilitate tracking if the debit card was used. That decision created the opportunity law enforcement needed. Soon afterward, withdrawals began appearing on Koenig's account. Beginning in late February and continuing into early March 2012, small ATM withdrawals were made in multiple states, including Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Each transaction generated a timestamp and location record. Each ATM had surveillance cameras. The first major investigative break occurred in Willcox, Arizona. ATM footage from Willcox showed a white Ford Focus in the background during a withdrawal from Koenig's account. That vehicle became a focal point. Investigators circulated the description of the white Ford Focus and its Texas license plates to law enforcement agencies along the Interstate 10 corridor, the highway route connecting several of the withdrawal locations. The ATM footage did not immediately reveal a name. Instead, it revealed movement. The same vehicle appeared across different states during the withdrawal period. The pattern narrowed the search to a single car traveling eastward. It is important to distinguish the vehicles involved. During the Anchorage abduction, Keyes used a white pickup truck. During part of his travel in Texas, he rented a Kia Soul. However, the vehicle repeatedly captured in ATM surveillance footage, and the one he was driving when arrested was a white 2012 Ford Focus with Texas plates registered to Israel Keyes. As ATM footage was reviewed and shared, law enforcement agencies across the region became alert to the vehicle description. The combination of financial tracking and vehicle imagery created a corridor-based search. On March 13, 2012, in Lufkin, Texas, a police officer conducted a traffic stop on a white Ford Focus for a routine traffic violation. The vehicle matched the description circulated from the ATM footage. The driver was Israel Keyes. During the stop and subsequent search, officers found Samantha Koenig's debit card in his possession, along with her cell phone and other incriminating evidence. He was taken into custody. The debit card withdrawals had not directly revealed his identity in a single moment. Rather, the Willcox, Arizona ATM footage and subsequent vehicle broadcast along Interstate 10 narrowed the field until the stop occurred. Once in custody, Keyes confessed to killing Samantha Koenig. He later admitted responsibility for the 2011 murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Essex, Vermont. Those murders were confirmed based on details he provided and corroborating evidence. Beyond those confirmed cases, the FBI has publicly stated that, based on Keyes' interviews and drawings found in his jail cell, investigators believe he was responsible for at least 11 murders across the United States. The precise total remains uncertain because he did not fully disclose all victims. The ATM withdrawals were small transactions, but each one placed him in a location at a specific time. Each surveillance camera captured pieces of the same vehicle. The Willcox, Arizona footage became the pivotal visual link. From there, information moved outward along the highway network he was traveling. For someone who had spent years avoiding patterns, the withdrawals created one. Israel Keyes remained in federal custody at the Anchorage Correctional Complex while awaiting trial. On December 2, 2012, he was found dead in his cell in what authorities ruled a suicide. His death prevented a full public trial and left unresolved questions about additional victims. The ninth case. John Wayne Gacy operated from 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Des Plaines, Illinois, presenting himself as a construction contractor who hired young men for part-time labor. His company, PDM Contractors, was legitimately performing remodeling work at Nilsen Pharmacy in December 1978. That legitimate contract provided the reason for his presence inside the store. It also provided the setting for the final mistake that exposed him. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest was working at Nilsen Pharmacy. Earlier that day, Gacy had visited the store in connection with the remodeling project being performed by his company. During that visit, he mentioned that he was hiring part-time workers and paid well. Witnesses later confirmed that Gacy spoke directly with Robert about possible employment. That conversation was not hidden. It was overheard by others. It was specific. It was recent. That evening, Robert told his mother he intended to speak with the contractor about the job opportunity. Separately, his mother had asked him to run an errand, but the photo processing receipt that would later become central to the investigation did not belong to her. According to historical accounts, including later statements attributed to Kim Byers' family, it was Kim Byers, Robert's co-worker, who placed her own photo receipt into the pocket of Robert's blue parka. She had reportedly borrowed his jacket earlier that evening and slipped the receipt into the pocket when returning it so she would not forget it. Robert left work, saying he would return shortly. He did not return. When Robert was reported missing, investigators began reconstructing his final movements. Pharmacy employees identified the contractor who had spoken to him, John Wayne Gacy. He had introduced himself openly as the owner of PDM Contractors. The remodeling contract at the pharmacy confirmed why he was there. Multiple witnesses confirmed the employment discussion. Police interviewed Gacy on December 13, 1978. During early questioning, his statements were inconsistent. Investigative accounts indicate that he initially attempted to minimize or distance himself from Robert and the interaction at the pharmacy. When confronted with witness testimony confirming the job conversation, he revised his account. He admitted visiting the store but claimed Robert never came to his home afterward. The evolving explanation raised suspicion. Investigators also learned that Gacy had previously been convicted in Iowa in 1968 for sexually assaulting a teenage boy and had served approximately 18 months of a 10-year sentence before being released in 1970. While that conviction did not establish guilt in Robert's disappearance, it intensified scrutiny. Police placed Gacy under surveillance while preparing a search warrant. On December 21, 1978, officers executed the first search warrant at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. During that search, investigators recovered a critical piece of evidence, Kim Byers' photo processing receipt, which had been placed in Robert's jacket pocket earlier that evening. Official investigative summaries and court records state that the receipt was recovered from trash associated with Gacy's residence, most commonly described as kitchen trash inside the home. Some later accounts and defense-oriented discussions have questioned the exact bin in which it was found, but the official record used in court reflects that it was recovered from trash during the initial search. The significance was immediate. If, as Gacy claimed, Robert had never come to the house, the receipt could not logically have been present in the trash there. Its discovery contradicted his account directly. The recovery of the receipt strengthened probable cause substantially. Investigators used that evidence as part of the basis for obtaining a second, broader search warrant authorizing excavation beneath the home. That second warrant opened the crawl space. As officers began digging beneath the house, they uncovered human remains. Over the following days, investigators recovered the remains of 26 victims from the crawl space itself. Additional victims were found buried elsewhere on the property, including beneath the garage and in the yard. In total, 29 victims were recovered from the property. 4 additional victims were later determined to have been disposed of in the Des Plaines River. The total number of victims linked to Gacy reached 33. During the searches, investigators also recovered Robert Piest's blue parka from inside Gacy's home. The presence of the jacket reinforced the physical link between Robert and the residence. Combined with the receipt found in the trash, it eliminated any remaining ambiguity about whether Robert had entered the house. The evidence now contradicted Gacy's statements on multiple levels. As excavation continued and the scope of the discoveries became clear, Gacy's position deteriorated rapidly. On December 21 and 22, 1978, during extended questioning and under mounting pressure, he made incriminating statements. By December 22, he had effectively confessed to multiple murders. He was formally arrested shortly thereafter. The investigation established a consistent pattern. Gacy frequently used his construction business as a means of access. Employment offers brought young men to his home. The remodeling contract at Nilsen Pharmacy provided a legitimate explanation for his presence there on December 11th. But that legitimacy worked against him. The job discussion occurred in public. Witnesses remembered it. The timeline was precise. The receipt placed in Robert's jacket pocket was later found discarded in Gacy's trash. The blue parka was recovered from inside the residence. Together, those details dismantled the claim that Robert had never arrived. The turning point in the case was not a dramatic breakthrough. It was documentation aligned with physical evidence. The trial began on February 6, 1980, in Cook County, Illinois. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence recovered from the crawl space and burial sites, witness testimony, and physical evidence seized during the searches. The defense argued insanity. The jury rejected that argument. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was convicted of 33 counts of murder, one of the highest totals in American criminal history at the time. He received death sentences for 12 of those killings. After years of appeals, he was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. 10th case, February 8, 1983. A dyno rod engineer arrived at 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill, North London, to investigate a complaint about blocked drains. Residents had reported slow water flow and a foul smell rising through the building. What began as a routine plumbing call would expose one of Britain's most disturbing serial murder cases. As the engineer worked the communal pipe system, he recovered fragments of decomposing flesh and small bone. Historical accounts frequently identify Michael Catron as the engineer who first encountered the remains, with Desmond Cullen noted as a colleague or supervisor involved in the follow-up inspection. What is undisputed is that human remains were pulled from the drainage system. Police were contacted immediately. By the following day, February 9th, Metropolitan Police officers traced the blockage to the top-floor bedsit occupied by Dennis Nilsen. When they entered his flat, the smell was overpowering. Inside, they discovered plastic bags containing human remains. In a wardrobe, officers found a human head. Additional bones were concealed beneath floorboards and stored in other parts of the small room. The blocked drain had not revealed a single crime. It had exposed a series of killings that stretched back nearly 5 years. While being transported in a police car after his arrest, Nilsen was asked how many bodies there were. His reply became infamous: 15 or 16. That number would later shift. In subsequent interviews and journals, he sometimes stated 12, sometimes 15, occasionally 16. Years later, he suggested he may have exaggerated at the moment of arrest. Police ultimately concluded that at least 12 victims were confirmed or strongly believed to have been killed, though he was convicted of 6 murders and 2 attempted murders due to evidentiary limitations. The killings began in December 1978. His first known victim was 14-year-old Stephen Holmes. At the time, Holmes was recorded as a missing person and was not included in the 1983 prosecution. In 2006, Nilsen confessed in a letter from prison that Holmes had been his first victim, confirming the true beginning of the series. Between 1978 and 1981, Nilsen lived at 195 Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood. The property had a garden which became central to his concealment. After killing, primarily by ligature strangulation, he often retained the bodies inside the flat for days or weeks before dismembering them. He burned remains in garden bonfires and buried what was left beneath the soil. Fire and burial allowed him to avoid detection for years. In October 1981, he moved to 23 Cranley Gardens. The relocation removed access to a garden. The only disposal route available was plumbing shared with other residents. Strangulation remained his primary method of killing. Forensic evidence later confirmed that ligature strangulation was the principal cause of death in most cases. In some instances, he used water, placing victims in a bath or using a bucket to ensure death after strangulation. The pattern was deliberate and controlled. Without a garden, he began attempting to dispose of smaller body parts by flushing them down the toilet. For a time, the sewer system appeared to absorb what he forced into it. But communal infrastructure has limits. In early February 1983, residents noticed slow drainage and foul odors. Accounts differ slightly about who first raised the issue. Some suggest Nilsen himself mentioned the blocked drains, possibly believing earlier attempts to clear minor obstructions had succeeded. Other accounts indicate the concern was primarily driven by neighboring residents disturbed by the smell and poor drainage. What is clear is that the complaint became collective. On February 8, 1983, the blockage was investigated. Within hours, human remains were recovered. By February 9th, police were inside Nilsen's flat. His final known victim, 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair, had been killed on January 26, 1983, less than 2 weeks before the drain failure. The timing proved decisive. Without the plumbing malfunction, further disposal might have destroyed additional evidence. The investigation expanded to Melrose Avenue. There, officers recovered additional human remains from the garden and beneath the property, confirming earlier killings. His trial began at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on October 24, 1983. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence from both addresses, including remains recovered from the Cranley Gardens pipe system. The blocked drain anchored the final stage of the timeline, providing recent physical proof of active disposal. On November 4, 1983, Dennis Nilsen was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. He received a life sentence. In December 1994, Home Secretary Michael Howard imposed a whole life tariff, ensuring he would never be released. Later legal reviews of life sentencing procedures did not alter that outcome. Dennis Nilsen died in custody at HMP Full Sutton on May 12, 2018. 11th case, Winnipeg, Manitoba, June 1927. Newspaper headlines describing a traveling strangler who had already crossed an international border. Somewhere in Winnipeg, a man with fresh scratches hidden beneath his hair sat calmly in a barber's chair. That man was Earl Nelson, and the small marks on his scalp would become one layer in the chain that stopped him. Before Winnipeg, there was California, Oregon, and Washington. Born May 12, 1897, in San Francisco, Nelson suffered a serious childhood head injury after being struck by a streetcar, a fact later referenced in court proceedings. As an adult, he moved through petty crime, institutional confinement, and unstable employment before escalating into serial murder. In early 1926, women who ran boarding houses along the American West Coast began turning up dead. The method was consistent and calculated. Nelson answered classified advertisements under aliases. He rented rooms. He waited for privacy. He strangled the landlady with his bare hands. In several cases, he concealed the body in a closet or beneath a bed before quietly boarding a train to the next city. Newspapers gave him names: the Gorilla Man, the Gorilla Killer, the Dark Strangler. The labels reflected both the brutality of his manual strangulation method and how reporters described his physical appearance. What made him dangerous was not just violence, it was mobility. In the 1920s, interstate communication between police departments was limited. There was no centralized database, no instant fingerprint sharing. Nelson understood that movement created delay. For more than a year, it worked. Until Winnipeg. On June 10, 1927, 27-year-old Emily Patterson was murdered in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She had entered into a rental arrangement under one of Nelson's aliases. The killing followed the same pattern established in earlier West Coast murders. Soon after, 14-year-old Lola Cowan was murdered in the same city. Winnipeg reacted with urgency. Newspapers warned of a traveling offender believed to be linked to killings across the United States. Authorities circulated suspect descriptions, noting that at least one earlier victim had fought back fiercely, possibly leaving the attacker with scratches. That detail was small, but it was public, and someone paid attention. After Patterson's murder, Nelson visited a Winnipeg barber shop. As the barber trimmed his hair, he noticed visible scratches and marks on Nelson's scalp. They appeared recent. Newspaper reports confirmed the barber recognized that these injuries matched descriptions circulating about a suspect who had recently struggled with a victim. He alerted police. The scratches did not prove guilt. They did not identify Nelson as the West Coast killer, but they reinforced suspicion at a moment when authorities were actively searching. Nelson was arrested in Winnipeg in June 1927. But even arrest did not stop him immediately. While being transported under custody in Manitoba, Nelson made a desperate attempt to escape. Near Killarney, he jumped from a moving train. He ran toward the United States border, attempting to re-enter the fragmented investigative landscape that had shielded him for months. Authorities launched a search. He was recaptured the following day near the border. The escape attempt added another layer to the case: consciousness of guilt, urgency, awareness that the circle was tightening. But suspicion still required confirmation. That confirmation came from fingerprints. Authorities in Winnipeg strongly suspected Nelson was responsible for the earlier West Coast murders. Witness descriptions aligned. Boarding house patterns matched. His travel timeline intersected with unsolved killings. But suspicion is not proof. Captain Matheson of the San Francisco Police Department traveled to Winnipeg carrying fingerprint records from previous investigations in California. Nelson's fingerprints were taken in custody. They matched. The cross-border fingerprint comparison definitively confirmed his identity and tied him to prior criminal records in the United States. In the 1920s, fingerprint science was already accepted in courts, and this verification eliminated uncertainty. Names could change, cities could change, fingerprints did not. The accumulation had become decisive. Investigators ultimately linked Nelson to at least 22 murders committed in 1926 and 1927 across the United States and Canada. Later historical research documented another disturbing element of his crimes. He engaged in necrophilia following several murders. This detail was largely absent from contemporary 1920s newspaper reporting due to social conventions of the era, but appears in subsequent archival and scholarly accounts. The brutality extended beyond strangulation, but legally, Winnipeg would proceed first. Nelson was tried in Manitoba for the murder of Emily Patterson. The prosecution presented evidence placing him with Patterson, detailing the rental arrangement, witness observations, his aliases, and his movements across jurisdictions. His escape attempt reinforced the case narrative. Fingerprint confirmation removed any doubt about identity. He was convicted. On January 13, 1928, a Friday, Earl Nelson was executed by hanging at Vaughan Street Jail in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He was 30 years old. American authorities never tried him for the earlier murders. The movement ended there. Finally, the 12th case. Albert Fish did not kill for money, revenge, or jealousy. His motive, as presented at trial and in his own statements, was rooted in severe psychological disturbance and violent sexual compulsions. Psychiatrists described long-standing sadistic fantasies and obsessive behavior. In his later confession, Fish claimed he targeted children because he believed they were innocent and easier to manipulate. The crime against Grace Budd in 1928 fit that pattern of calculated deception paired with deep mental instability. On May 25, 1928, Fish entered the Budd family's Manhattan apartment using the alias Frank Howard. He told the family he was a farmer looking to hire Edward Budd, Grace's older brother, for work in the country. Some accounts indicate he claimed to be from Farmingdale, Long Island, while others describe him more generally as having a farm outside the city. The promise of rural employment was persuasive. The Budds were struggling financially. Later that same day, Fish returned with a new story. He said there was a birthday party for his niece and asked if 10-year-old Grace could attend. Her parents agreed. Grace Budd left the apartment that afternoon. She never returned. Police investigated immediately. The address Fish had provided did not exist. The name Frank Howard produced no reliable record. Witness descriptions, elderly, thin, gray-haired, were too broad in a city of millions. The case gradually stalled. Months passed, then years. For 6 years, the Budd family had no answers. In November 1934, Grace's mother received a letter mailed from New York City. Inside was a handwritten confession. The writer admitted abducting Grace in 1928 and described taking her by train to Irvington in Westchester County. He stated the murder occurred at an abandoned house in East Irvington. In the letter, he referred to the property as Wisteria Cottage, though the location was officially known as Worthington Cottage. The letter's contents were graphic and disturbing, including claims of cannibalism. Those descriptions traumatized the family and intensified public reaction once reported in newspapers. However, an important factual nuance remains. When partial skeletal remains were later recovered based on Fish's confession, there was no independent forensic confirmation of cannibalism. Those specific claims relied entirely on Fish's own statements. The brutality of the letter was documented. The physical evidence did not independently verify every detail he described. The letter was anonymous. It was not signed with Fish's name. Investigators focused on the physical evidence in front of them. When detectives held the envelope up to the light, a faint watermark became visible. It read, New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. The small imprint shifted the case. Police contacted the association and traced where its stationery had been distributed. Their investigation led them to a former boarding house at 200 East 52nd Street in Manhattan. The landlady, Mrs. Delia Flanagan, had possessed stationery connected to the association through her late husband. She informed detectives that a former tenant had taken some of that paper when he moved out years earlier. The tenant was Albert Fish. The watermark connected the anonymous letter to the boarding house. The boarding house connected to Fish. But detectives sought additional confirmation. They compared the handwriting in the letter to prior writing samples linked to Fish. Investigators examined a note Fish had written for a messenger in 1928, as well as a Western Union message he had sent. The handwriting similarities provided the final confirmation necessary to link Fish directly to the anonymous confession. On December 13, 1934, Detective William King and other officers located Fish at his rooming house. Fish was 64 years old, thin, gray-haired, physically slight. When confronted, he briefly lunged at Detective King with a razor. He was quickly disarmed and restrained. Fish was taken into custody. During questioning, he admitted abducting Grace Budd in 1928. He described traveling by train to Irvington and leading her to Worthington Cottage in East Irvington. His statements aligned with details in the anonymous letter and with the timeline of Grace's disappearance. He was formally charged with first-degree murder in January 1935. The trial began on March 11, 1935, in White Plains, New York. The prosecution presented the anonymous letter, the watermark evidence, testimony connecting the stationery to Mrs. Flanagan's boarding house, and handwriting comparisons linking Fish to the letter. Members of the Budd family identified Fish as the man who had used the alias Frank Howard. The defense relied on insanity. Medical testimony revealed extensive psychological disturbance. One of the most striking pieces of evidence presented in court was a set of X-rays showing numerous metal needles embedded in Fish's pelvic region. Contemporary 1935 newspaper reports sometimes cited 27 needles. Later, true crime literature frequently lists 29. While the precise count varies across sources, the presence of multiple inserted needles was confirmed. The defense argued that such extreme self-harm demonstrated profound mental illness. The prosecution emphasized deliberate conduct, the false identity, the fabricated farm story, the calculated return to the Budd apartment, and the 6 years without detection. They argued that these actions showed awareness and intent. After relatively brief deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense. On March 27, 1935, Albert Fish was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. On January 16, 1936, at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, Fish was executed in the electric chair at age 65. Thanks for watching to the end. That support means everything to this channel. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.